from Music for All and presented by Yamaha. It's Teaching Social Emotional Learning Through Music, a practical web series for all music educators, embedding SEL into music education. On this episode, we welcome teacher, entrepreneur, and equity advocate Nicole Robinson. Please welcome our host of Teaching Social Emotional Learning Through Music, Scott Edgar.
Welcome to the next episode of Teaching Social and Emotional Learning Through Music. We are thrilled today to be joined by founder and CEO of Cultural Connections by Design. This episode's a little bit different. This is someone, the incomparable Nicole Robinson is joining us today. And we are going to delve into what this looks like from someone who was in music education, took the entrepreneurial leap, started her own business explicitly dedicated to equity. And we're going to start to tie those knots all the way together so that we can look at what social and emotional learning looks like in her work and her vision for what this can look like in music education. Nicole, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Scott, for the invitation. I'm very excited about spending this time with you today.
Absolutely. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey? You went through a lifetime of music education and then found another avenue to change your identity and to grow there. So can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Absolutely. So what's interesting about my story, it starts off that although I dedicated my entire career to music education, and particularly music education in urban schools and urban areas and settings, I myself was not a product of public school music. Unfortunately, I grew up in a very small rural town, and we never had a music teacher in that town. So oftentimes people go, "How did you get from not having any exposure to music education to this was my life's work?" I am fortunate that my parents valued arts and music, so I had private lessons ongoing throughout my life. And then my very first teaching position was in Durham, North Carolina, in Durham Public Schools. And there in a very, very urban school setting, I share oftentimes it was centered between two housing development projects. And it was there that just really built the foundation of who I was as a teacher. I was at an arts magnet school, and I had a principal that not only valued me, but valued the arts and believed that her students and her children deserved the absolute best in all aspects of education. But she really believed the arts opened up opportunities for these children that particularly would not have opportunity otherwise. So therefore, I was centered, my very first job at a school, that the entire curriculum was centered around myself and my co-arts teachers. And I learned how to integrate music into the context of learning in various aspects. It just really broadened me as a teacher, and it broadened me as a person as far as learning and understanding these lived experience of the students that we taught, the parents that we served, seeing my principal, the heart that she had, and encouraged parents, this is your school. I don't care how you feel, this is your school. You have the right, the way she elevated them, just really built the foundation for the work that I've spent my entire life doing. After being in Durham, and I was at a couple of schools there, I moved to Chapel Hill Public Schools. And anyone who knows North Carolina, it is, I remember being a young teacher, someone said, "You're leaving the rags and going to the riches." And I wasn't understanding the undertone of that comment that was being made to me. And later, when I moved over to Chapel Hill, I learned that people assume that the children that I taught in Chapel Hill didn't have issues or problems, which then positioned those children to actually have problems and issues. And at a young age, understanding that these children have problems, they may look different. Because while I was there, I'm now in middle school teaching, we had several attempts of suicide. We still had these underlying issues, but because there's a perception that these rich kids or these wealthier kids had no problems, I started thinking that, well, who's kind of going to help work and rescue if there's this perception, that perception. And at the age of 20, 21, I was able to understand and start juxtaposing, well, if a parent's not home, a parent is not at home, regardless if they are in the club all night, or if they're working 3 jobs and working all night, or if they take an extended vacation and leave their kids and go abroad for 6 months. A parent not at home is not at home. Not saying those things are not played out differently, but I'm very fortunate for that. Moved into graduate work. At the time, I had just graduated from North Carolina Central University, historically Black college in Durham, North Carolina. Then from there, moved into Florida State University, where I obtained my PhD and really opened up my world. And that is where I probably put the first pillar of my research in, at the time, urban education. At the time, we called it at-risk education. From there, I went to Memphis, Tennessee, and that really cemented my work in urban education and primarily providing quality education for children that was traditionally racialized and marginalized in schools. We did wonderful, great work there in that school district. And I served as a music education professor of elementary music education at various universities throughout my career. University of Memphis, I was there a majority of time, 13 years. And then I had a stint at Virginia Commonwealth University, Syracuse University. And my last position was at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, Utah. So people ask, how did you end up in Utah? And I was actually recruited as the Beverly Taylor Sorensen Endowed Presidential Professor, which was a very prestigious position. And even though I had no clue about Utah, I'm not sure if I knew where it even was on the map per se. I knew it was over there, but where exactly over there, I wasn't quite sure. Once again, I lived my life with these leaps of faith, as you can see. And I took a leap of faith and moved out to Salt Lake City, Utah. And after being there for a few years, I was later asked to serve as Associate Vice President for Equity and Diversity. And many people say, now, how did you go from being a music professor to a VP of diversity? And it was all of the research, the work, the understanding, the growth, development. It all just kind of positioned me to be able to do that level of work on a university wide level position, which was very fulfilling and very enriching, understanding that I really had a hand at really changing, once again, just like changing the children's lives that I did in my very first teaching job. Here I am at a university level doing that. So that's kind of my academic trajectory. And then 2 years ago, I accidentally kind of stumbled into the entrepreneurship. I tell people I did not wake up and say one day, I'm going to create this to have a business. I understood that the teachers that we were graduating, predominantly white, middle class, and in music education, male teachers, they would go out into these very diverse schools and school settings, and they were really struggling. And I understood that it wasn't that they didn't have the desire to be really great teachers. It wasn't that they didn't desire to really do to provide their kids with really great education. There was such a disparity between the lived experience that they had and those kids that they were teaching and the parents that they were serving, that was oftentimes the challenge in getting in the way. And I had an invitation to kind of do one of my circuits of, come and present on urban education. And this particular invitation, sure, I'll be there. And a few days before, I realized, wait a minute, if I continue to say, my typical kind of presentation on it, who's urban? Primarily children of color, of poverty, their parents' limited education, and so on and so forth. I was kind of taking the magnifying glass and kind of pointing it to, these are the problems. This is what they bring, right? And inadvertently, I can remember not even being asleep that night. I'm kind of, this was a group of students that are getting ready to graduate, and they were pre-service teachers, their senior year, getting ready to go do student teaching. And I'm kind of inadvertently saying, if they don't succeed academically, it's okay, because they came with all these things. And I didn't want to be responsible for that. And how do I help my teachers? The only ones that can really change those kids' life are the ones in front of them. How do I help them function and become change agents of change in the classroom? And in order to do that, I had to not talk about the surface things that oftentimes we talk about in diversity, equity, and inclusion, but to talk about the really deep-seated contexts and constructs that create the circumstances in which they encounter. So we had to talk about racism, classism, sex. We had to talk about really tough stuff. And understanding in this presentation, predominantly white middle class kids, in my positionality as a Black woman presenting this context, what could I do? So this idea of gamification, of gamifying this process kind of popped in my head. And I never forget shaking in my boots, presenting these concepts and talking about power and privilege. And about a year later, just what happened, I was at a conference and several of those kids ran to me and said, "We still remember the things you taught us." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I joke and say that the word kind of got out. Nicole has this game. So I used to say I was the lady with a game in a suitcase. I'll just travel around and go and work with different universities and schools. And it got to the point where I needed to be able to expand and be available. So that was the leap of faith that I took into entrepreneurship world. So
we will get back to carrying suitcases one of these days, Nicole.
Oh, one day.
So fascinating. Your diversity of experiences have clearly forms who you are. And you started to hint at something that I would like to kind of pull that thread just a little bit more. When we say urban, we all know where our mind goes. It goes
Absolutely.
to students of color. It goes to poverty. It goes to all of these deficit models.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say urban education, what does that mean to you?
Yeah. So urban, technically, by definition, is just the number of people within a per square radius, per square mile footage, or whatever the footprint, right? And I actually did a real writing on this about how when we say urban apparel, that's in a positive light. Urban sprawl, that's growth and development. Urban renewal. Or when we use urban in other contexts, it's positioned as a very positive light of growth, opportunity, development. But when we say urban education, then automatically that deficit lens comes on, and that means poor, children of color, and et cetera. So for me, what urban means are actually very dedicated people and teachers dedicating to really provide education to our most vulnerable children in our society. That's what urban means to me. And many times I talk also about rural, because I grew up very, very rural. And I understand, and many people don't realize, a lot of the characteristics are shared, that between urban and rural are very much shared, right? It's just that density of population, people is not in rural, but the access to the quality education, like I said, I grew up very poor. I went to a K-12 school, no music education. My parents was in that area because of their work. My father's work needed to be in that particular county. But because of their intersection of socioeconomic status and their education, okay, they drove me 20 minutes to the city for the piano lessons and those different sorts of things. So that was my opportunity. So yeah, for me, when I think of urban, it's for me, my heartbeat, because that is what I have dedicated my entire life to. And it saddens me that when we think about urban in education, that is the one place that we then shift from a lens of a growth mindset of thinking about urban to a deficit mindset.
Oh, that's profound. I've never thought of it like that. My heart and my admiration, the music teachers in those rural districts, how many hats do they wear? They do the band, they do the choir, they do the orchestra, they do guitar, they do theory, they do the music. How many hats of those are uncomfortable? So absolutely. So thank you for giving us some insight on that. Now, amidst all of this, when you've started to define and thought about the mission of your company and you founded it and really gave it some legs, what does diversity education mean to you? Because you said something early on that you said that all of these skills are so important no matter what school district you are across the country, whether you come from an urban, suburban, rural, and knowing that there are outliers within all of those settings. So with as broad of a lens as you can give us, what does diversity education mean to you?
Absolutely. So I remember when the light bulb went off when I said, I don't provide diversity training, I provide diversity education. And the difference between that for me, I don't believe training works. I don't believe training is long lasting. And here's the example I give. When you train, a training process is a skill-oriented skill development process. So I go to the gym, I train my muscles. If I'm working on the assembly line, I train myself to kind of do this particular action, whatever that particular thing is. The purpose of training is that I'm going to train you to do the skill so that when the task is needed again, you should be able to instantly deploy the skill to be able to do the task, replicate the task. Now that sounds ideal, but the problem is that you can't provide a person with a training in diversity and inclusion because never is the task identical to the context, right? So I always sometimes say you can have an incident with the exact same person, but it's at a different time. So then it's not the exact same thing. Or you can have it at something that's happening kind of simultaneously, but with two different people. So therefore it's not the same thing. So I can't give you a checklist. And I think that is the reason why people are so frustrated with diversity training, because we go in and go, if you're in a race based or context situation, here's the things to do. And it doesn't work and they hit these walls. My philosophy is if we educate people on the broader concepts, the broader constructs, the historical context, why are we here and why are the systems functioning as they function? When you understand how something functions, then when you move around and the context changes, you have enough knowledge to be able to pull and actually navigate the context, because now you say, oh no, in this context, here's where the power structure is. Here's what I do over here in this context. So I say I do a deeper dive. It's a slower process. Requires more on my end. But if we want real substantial change for individuals to be able to change, we really have to provide them with an educational process around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and not just here's a training you run through and then we're done. Trainers are good for certain things. I'm not downing the concept of training, but training is skill oriented. Education is holistically, conceptually oriented. And those are the two different things and you get a different result.
You're preaching to the choir. We don't train teachers, we train dogs. We get it. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
When we look at that and we look at what this educational process looks in, it's the same thing that we're dealing right now with social and emotional learning professional development, that it has to be integrated, it has to be embedded, and it has to be sustained. And when we can achieve those three things, we get out of the scope of training and into the scope of education, where we're giving them adaptive expertise to apply to so many different settings. So great to see the intersections there. Now, I'm going to ask you to take where you are now and meld it with where you were before you made that leap. Okay. Why is the music classroom the perfect place to do this?
Oh, goodness. First of all, I get so excited when I'm working with a group of music educators, I think we're so special, and I'm quite everyone thinks every subject area thinks they're special. I just think music, we're very special. I think we're so special in the subject that we teach that in itself, music can be extremely inclusive. Within itself, we can have everyone participating oftentimes if given the right tools, regardless of their social identity or context and those different sorts of things. So I think the potential of what we have just in the nature of what we do is within itself inclusive based. And I think it's a really great opportunity to that place of webbing and bringing people together. In addition to that, it is probably one of those few subjects that can feed a soul in a very different way. Now, someone who maybe loves math would probably argue with me that possibly another subject may not. I think we have an opportunity for people to feel quick accomplishment immediately. Every day you can walk into my classroom and you can feel that you have accomplished. Every day you can walk in my classroom, you can feel that you are important because I need your part. And every day you can walk out and feel the sense of meaning. And I often tell teachers that oftentimes our music classroom is the only part of success that many students experience throughout the day. And for us not to just toss that loosely to the wind. So I think that is the reason why. And I think also because of the fact that we do have the ability to teach larger sizes through ensembles, we have the ability to explore cultures through the music that we use. It's just we're so fortunate to have a subject that has so many layers of opportunities that we can expose children I'm just gosh, what a great question. I'm thinking also about the audience connection when we do have that performance, right? What we do to move the audience, or what we do to educate the audience when we stop and say, let me teach you about this piece we're getting ready to do. It's such, we have so many layers that I don't think many other subjects, maybe some other arts-based subjects do, but that maybe non-arts-based, subjects have.
Absolutely. That point about success, it's critical. And I think that's why a lot of music teachers feel like we are the cultural center of our students. They come together. I mean, my guess is, Nicole, your best friend is someone who you've made music with. My best friend certainly is.
Absolutely.
It came together around a music teacher in a music classroom.
Yes.
That's
exactly.
the connection we're after. Now, I'm going to push you a little bit on that because I agree with you 100%. But we know that for it to do this, it needs to be intentional and it needs to be purposeful, because many, many people, myself included, fall into the trap of the curriculum becoming white male dominated. And it's our history. It's where we've come from. So how do we navigate these challenges of privilege in a largely white male based music curriculum?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing is there's several kind of components of this answer. One, we need to reframe our teacher training processes. We need to reframe how we are preparing our music teachers on the university level to enter into these more diverse classrooms. The United States public school as a whole entity, as of 2014, now is a majority public school district. And teasing out, because the idea that people synonymously put urban, kids of color, poverty all looped together. No, our suburban schools are becoming more diverse. Our rural schools are becoming more diverse. We are just becoming more diverse overall as a nation. So one is to think about how do we retrain our teachers, and predominantly our white male teachers, because that's our dominant teaching force. And in that educate. And in that education process, how do we actually teach them these ideas of power and privilege, and teach them how to utilize, once they understand where their power and privilege resides within them, how do they utilize that to function as agents of change in the classroom for their students, and I keep saying, and for their parents, because we can't disconnect the extension of the family, right? And that then gives them power to think about the curriculum, and how do we reshape the curriculum to be more culturally inclusive, and how do we think about the literature? How do I go the extra mile to find the literature that's more culturally inclusive? How do I have those conversations? Or if I'm struggling with those conversations, how do I find the resources to help? So I do believe, once again, it starts with an education process of creating this change that we'll ultimately see in the classroom. And I'm going to say something that's going to be kind of really challenging. When I talk about power and privilege, and in music education, the power holders are white males. And how do they utilize that power to challenge our status quo in our profession but this is the way the curriculum is, or this is the rep list, or here's the this. But it's that voice, it's the white male voice that can disrupt it and really have us to really shift very quickly. And I hope that there is a time when more and more of our white male colleagues are activating that part of their power to be able to really kind of shift our profession forward and move us forward pretty quickly.
The responsibility is huge. And, Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yes, it does.
Spot on. So I'm going to ask you a question that I know gets a little bit closer to training than education. Okay. But what's one trick? Let's say that I'm in front of a classroom and I want to start a discussion on power and privilege. What's an icebreaker? What's one way that I can start that discussion in a music classroom?
Yeah, and I do want to say that in music, we do have a lot of training, right? You need to be trained on how to, conduct. We do have that piece of it. Um, so one thing I would say is I love to use myself as a teaching tool, and I think that is really a very safe place that as much as you know, I I'm a white male, and these are things I know. These are things I don't know. How about we explore this together? That is such a very uh, opening prompt that the idea that I have to be the expert, I hope, would not kind of have that kind of intensity, right? And many times the reason why people don't move forward is the fear of making a mistake, right? It is the fear of if I say something wrong. So starting off with, hey, how about this semester we're going to explore this together, and we're going to possibly all make mistakes, including myself. But as we explore, we're going to grow. That opens up the space for learning to happen in a very different way. And it doesn't have to be positioned that I'm the expert here, uh, position is this down on you. Any type of things that recognize self-identity, my one of my games is race, power, and responsibility. We go through 12 identity points from race, gender, sex, education, and all those different. But then where's your PowerPoint on those things? So in race, I'm here, but in gender, I'm here. And I think just any of those sorts of discussions are really, really, really a great opening for being able to start to have conversation. It's not about having a conversation, it's about building the culture in the classroom or within the environment to be able to have conversations, right? And when students trust that they can make mistakes because you are as well, then the culture is shifted. And now we're in a learning space together as we go through this journey together. I think that would be a really powerful option for a white male who's trying to move forward with doing this work.
Oh, Nicole, I love it. I love it. For those people who have watched this podcast and have delved in a little to SEL, what they're hearing right now is this idea of self, this idea that we need to be vulnerable as instructors. And if we show vulnerability, our students are going to feel comfortable to take risks. And that's what facilitates that safety. So thank you so much for opening that door for us. Now, if you spend 10 seconds on your website, I see so much SEL just all over it, but I'm not sure that that's something that you call it. If I spend some time on your website, I see reflexivity, I see critical consciousness, I see culture of belonging, and I see agents of change. What I would call it would be the 3 key pillars of SEL, which are identity, belonging, and agency. And when we look at it from that perspective, we're seeing so much commonality. Now, we're starting to engage in a little bit of a shift in SEL, because I think for a really long time, people used to think that SEL was something we did to our students. Just like in education, we do things, they learn, we teach, they learn. No, that's doing things to kiddos.
Right.
What we're learning is far more effective, and it took us too long to realize this, that when we do things with our students, we can get places.
Yeah.
So that's where we've kind of left others' decisions behind and started to think of it as identity, belonging, agency. So can you start helping us to connect these dots between what I just said and your work?
Absolutely. Goodness, they align so much. So I have learned. So I'm very fortunate in that when I started developing these games, like I said, I wasn't developing with an entrepreneurial lens. I was developing from an education and a research lens, because I was really trying to figure out how can we develop a process to better prepare our teachers, pre-service teachers, before they go out into the school system. So I was collecting data. And in collecting that data, I was actually noticing that there was a kind of progression in their development process as they learned more and more about aspects of cultural diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I kind of found these 3 kind of stage processes that align very well with what you're doing, which is reflexivity, critical consciousness, and social agency, or agency of change, social agency. Social change agent. We're using a similar word in there. So let's start with reflexivity and identity. Okay. So I'll share what reflexivity is, and how about you join me, Scott? Let's do this, right? Okay. So I'll share what reflexivity means for me, and then how about you connect what identity means and so on and so forth. You
I
know,
love
I'm a
100%.
teacher at heart, right?
Let's do it. Game on.
Let's do it. Okay. So for me, when people walk through these stages, the very first stage is reflexivity. And in reflexivity, this is a place where they develop the ability to internally audit themselves. They develop the ability to start questioning their socialization. Why do I think the things I think? Why do I have the attitudes about the things we have? Where did this come from? What was my acculturation? How did that actually impact what I'm thinking at this point in time? My philosophy is that before you can bake change, we have to first understand where we are and the foundation of who we are, regardless the pretty parts and not so pretty parts. But that foundation is very important to identify. Now, how does that relate for you with identity?
Oh, it's home run. It's one-to-one. When we look at identity, we're talking about self-awareness and self-management. Can I identify who I am and where my beliefs come from? Can I set my own goals? Can I self-assess my strengths and my needs? And can I press the pause button when my emotions get too far in one direction or another, whether it be an up emotion or a down emotion? Mm-hmm. So when we look at all of those elements coming together, it's spot on that when we look at it from an SEL perspective, it is curriculum's too strong, but it's developmental. That before I can get to belonging, I have to understand my identity. And I firmly believe that that is a misstep that we're making right now in our society. We're asking people to just get along without delving into the reflexivity part that you're talking about. We call it reflection, to reflect upon where their beliefs are based. Where are those roots?
Absolutely. Perfect. Okay, so we're 1 for 1 there, Scott. Okay, so now after reflexivity, I noticed that my students moved into a stage of what I call critical consciousness. Now, in critical consciousness, I've just left reflexivity. Now I have kind of this audit of myself. I kind of understand my identities in a very different way. And in critical consciousness, I'm becoming a lot more critically aware. I'm sharpening my critical lens. And in this place, I'm starting to juxtapose aspects of my own identity with those that I'm seeing around me, which is now allowing me to start seeing inequities and seeing injustices and seeing the spaces where where the work needs to happen, right? Because oftentimes, I just had a conversation with someone recently that if a person can't see the gap, then we can't hold them responsible for not fixing the gap. You have to be able to see it. And so that ties with the reflexivity in that place, because now that you have more knowledge here, now it's opening the critical analysis over here in critical consciousness.
So to me, we're talking about blind spots and biases. So as we're starting to think about our identity, where are we missing? Where are the spots that we need to become aware of as we're starting to understand that we're not an island, that we fit within a cultural group? And in our music classrooms, as music teachers, we often see a lot of success here, but I would always encourage us as music teachers to start to think about, well, who are we really providing a sense of belonging for? And chances are, it's not everybody. Chances are it's just that top level of cream who buys into music no matter what. Mm-hmm. So as we talk about belonging, our job is to understand empathy, to understand multicultural awareness, to recognizing strengths, needs, and values of people who think like us, but more importantly, who differ in thought from us. And when we can do that, then we can really facilitate a safe space where students are willing to take risk. I was dialoguing with a choir teacher just yesterday, and he was saying, my students don't feel comfortable singing loudly in front of each other. And I was like, well, let's look at the root of that. Well, they're not comfortable being vulnerable, to put themselves out there, for their peers to see their strengths and their needs, because we can't hide in music class. We can't. Right. Exactly. And even if we do hide and don't sing, well, that's just as telling.
Yeah. Well, we're 2 for 2, Scott. You're right. And you talked about belonging. We talk about in my arena, I said, I'm not trying to help us build inclusive cultures. I want us to build cultures of belonging, because people can be included in a space and not feel that they belong. So we push to a place of culture of belonging. So I'm so glad. So we're 2 for 2. And I do want to share a quick little story personally about my own, as I started journeying and started having my own critical lens. It's like I shared with you, I grew up in very rural North Carolina. And I share that is to this day, the poorest area, not only in the state, but one of the poorest areas in the United States. But I was there, I wasn't raised poor because my parents were there for work purposes. And, you know, you grow up and you just grow up. And then fast forward, I go to college and now I'm in the city of the Research Triangle Park area. I'm teaching in the inner city school and I see the children that look like me, but I started critically consciously starting to understand that there was a different kind of lived experience. Now I didn't have the language, but what it was, well, I was juxtaposing that, oh, it's a difference of the socioeconomic status. So that becoming critical, because now I understand what the inequity is that's at play that created this different lived experience, which is needed. So I know what to do to create what you just said, this culture of belonging for everyone. Okay. And so now my third phase of development, then from there, you move into a social change agent. And that means now I have this very clear understanding of myself. I'm very clear able to understand systems of oppression that are at play. I'm able to understand what inequities are at play. And now I am empowered to use the places where I have my power and privilege and where I have privilege and not to be ashamed of them. Sometimes people go, I feel so ashamed because I have no. How do you activate it to create change for others? How do you activate to disrupt status quo? How do you activate it to dismantle systems of oppression or remove barriers of education in our context? So that is where I put in this kind of social agency or social change agent. This is now the action. This is where the work is.
Absolutely, the work. One of my dear friends, Elise Hackle, I was talking about how social and emotional learning gives students a voice. And she slapped me upside the head and said, Scott, our kids have voices. We just do a really good job of silencing them. Mm-hmm. And this is where, in this realm of agency, it's empowering our students, as you said so well, to feel and to know that their voice can make a difference. And in the music classroom, that means that the music teacher, the director, that model, that sage on stage model has to be dismantled so that we take steps back so that our students can take a step forward. When something's not happening well in our classrooms, well, can we ask our students, well, how are we going to fix this? Right. And the challenge here is that as music teachers, we're fixers. We fix things. We fix notes, we fix rhythms, we fix instruments.
Right.
You can't fix people.
Right.
You just can't. Right. So opening up the space, taking that humble pie just a little bit and say, well, let's ask more questions than we provide answers.
Absolutely. And so 3 for 3, Scott, we're just amazing, right? I want to go back to your question about the white male privileged piece in our profession. Walking through these 3 stages of reflexivity, understanding the privilege I have as a white male in our profession, understanding, okay, where does this create, where do I see the inequities at play when it comes to all aspects of our profession, teaching, music, and all sorts of things, and then in being empowered to actually make change, to be empowered to speak where I need to speak, to dismantle where you see things need to be dismantled. And that is the pipeline of that particular process, which is identical to yours of identity, belonging, and agency.
Oh, I love it. I love when we find so many things in common when maybe we didn't think that they were there. We knew that it was similar.
Right.
But talk about a life lesson right there. You know, we're talking the same language and we didn't even know it.
Right, exactly.
So let's talk about now just a little bit and continue to push back and ask me and let's make these connections. That was fun. Oh, that was a blast. So let's talk about what this looks like for the kiddos that you interact with. Mm-hmm. What life skills do you hope our K-12 students learn through music education?
You know, I want them to, and my goal is to push what I do even more. Right now I'm working with the teachers, but actually push it more to the students, because if we want to change society, we know we start in the schools with our children. I want our children to grow up to have a sense of empathy. I want them to have this idea of it's okay to think about someone other than myself, and actually it's a very honorable thing to do. I think right now, to think of others is considered a little bit more of a weakness and a softness, and that's dangerous as far as humanity is concerned. I want our younger children to, and they really are, you're starting to hear a little bit more of this language about power and privilege moving down in the curriculum. So they're having that language a little bit more than, of course, our generation did, definitely. I want them to understand Privilege is not anything negative. I talk about my own privileges. I use myself as a teacher too. I have a lot of privilege. But how do we utilize that to make change for others? And oftentimes people ask me, where do I start? What do I do? And I say, you start within your own sphere of influence. Start with what is there with you and around you. Start in your family, your church group, your home, your music classroom. Start within your sphere of influence. And then the most powerful way to use our power and privilege is to use it in a place that when the change happens, it doesn't probably benefit me at all. So I share, I'm highly educated. I have a PhD in education, the highest level of education you can get. I have spent my life working to provide better educational opportunity in music education in urban schools and settings. And I don't have a kid in urban education. I myself was not a project education. The power is not just the work I do. The power is that I'm working on behalf of something that is not going to basically give me something back in return.
Dr. Robinson, 100% when you said that. Absolutely. When we look at those skill sets, they're going to benefit our classrooms.
Yes.
You know, things are going to, I hate the term classroom management, but things are going to run more smoothly when we start to understand privilege, equity, and diversity. You know, you have a quotation on your website, and I want you to unpack it just a little bit for us, because I think that so many people right now are holding their breath. There are so many counter models right now in our world that go against what you and I are searching for. And the quotation is, it's not time to exhale yet. So what does that mean as a call to action for us as music educators?
Absolutely. That the quote that you're referring to is a blog post I wrote right after the murder of George Floyd. And I just remember that everything just kind of exploded for my company because everyone needed support and statements and what do we do and sort of thing. And it was a place that I realized as time went on, I haven't even kind of dealt with myself as far as what this experience witnessing. You know, people go, what made this one different? Because we saw it, we witnessed it, you know, and many times we hear about the aftermath of things, but this was different for almost everyone. That's why the impact and the response we saw came from people of all races and ages and that sort of thing. And so finally, I just out of the need as a diversity company to put something out there. And then I started this kind of therapeutic writing of exploring my own experience, police brutality experience myself, which was pretty aggressive. And I've always thought that if this happened to me as a polished, I'm using air quotes here, polished Black articulate woman, boy, Black men have no option, very little chance in those situations. So I started writing this, and it shifted and turned as I was writing because I kept unpacking these layers of my own experience and intertwining them with historical context of understanding that there is a training within police that kind of can lead to this, or the historical starting of this idea of capturing and arresting, started all the way back from a slavery context, intertwining that with the current day that happened with George Floyd, with my own, and you remember in the blog I kept saying, I can't breathe, right? I can't breathe. I think I put a period after each one. And then I share a little bit more, and then it come out, I can't breathe. And when I got to the end is that there's a place where I can't exhale yet, because as much as I get excited about the progress that we have made in our country, there is still such a place that I believe that we cannot exhale yet in relaxing in the work. And the blog I wrote was basically to my white colleagues and my white friends to basically kind of encourage them to utilize their power and privilege to help lift this mantle, this burden, or whatever you want to call it, that is still very pervasive in our society, that many of them didn't even know existed. It was like it was an experience that that Black people experience in this country that they didn't know existed. And so to tie this back into education, you know, our predominantly 85% white teaching force, especially those who may be in these urban areas or in these rural areas who are dealing with children of color who are probably also has the identity point and intersection of poverty. This is their daily lived experience. They can't even walk to the store to get candy, remember, without this fear. And so I believe it's a charge of the work is far from over. And I haven't gotten to a place personally where I feel like we have kind of crossed a mantle where okay, we can relax now. And I think that happened during the presidency of President Barack Obama. There was a place that everyone relaxed. We've made it. We have a Black president. We're good. And that relaxing opened up space for something that we probably didn't think we would kind of see. And that's the part about relaxing. There's a book I read called The Burden of Freedom. It's a spiritual book. But the whole point of that is that the places where you think you're free, or you kind of have this place that we exhale, there's a responsibility that sits there. And in that place, if we relax and just go, oh, I'm here, I've done it. Okay. But what do we do to maintain? And I think that's really the essence of what I was trying to say. I'm not able to get there where I can just completely relax and let go and feel like, okay, we're just going to be fine. There's still a lot of education that needs to happen. But I want to say this in a positive way. Someone had asked Robin DiAngelo, did she think the recent term of events has helped or hurt diversity practices? And I agree with her response. She said, it has definitely helped, because before, oftentimes, people didn't realize they needed an education around diversity. You know, things are fine. We're all fine. And now there is at least an awareness that I need to learn more. I don't know. I need to educate myself. I need to grow. And that I am very proud of. And I'm very proud of many of my white friends and colleagues, particularly who are like, hey, I'm reading, I'm learning, I'm growing, because I do have a responsibility and I didn't know, but that's no longer an excuse. I'm going to do the work I have to do. So that's promising. I'm very excited about that.
100%. When I hear you talk about that, to me, the question then becomes, how do we use music as a portal? For those people who have watched previous episodes, Alex Shapiro coined this now famous quotation that social and emotional learning is a portal inward towards our souls and a portal outward to the world around us. And I firmly believe that music can be that portal to do exactly what you just said.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I think I'll just steal that quote because I think it's bi-directional, right? I think in many professions and in many subject areas, it's one directional. And I think that's the power of music. It's bi-directional and it's multi-directional, and it can impact so many people at one time. And so I think that's the power that we have. We just have to be intentional, and we have to be mindful, and we have to be brave in doing it.
Oh, thank you so much. So, as we talked about at the very, very beginning, this is a different type of dialogue, and I know that there oftentimes guests don't have the opportunity to counter with me, but do you have any questions for me?
Well, kind of, we almost did a little bit of our activity, but what I was going to ask is that where do you see a layer of diversity, equity, and inclusion? I'm not sure if you see it as a layer in there or just kind of a threading through the development of socio-emotional learning for teachers in music education.
Yeah, it's spot on. And it's the dialogue that we're having right now, because as I was saying, SEL used to be something that we taught our teachers to do to your students. It can be very scripted. It can be very forced. It can be very hard to make organic to our music classrooms. And we've come up with what we're now affectionately calling SEL 2.0, where it is an opportunity to co-learn with our students to unpack the root causes of inequity, and so that we're developing communicative justice and understanding what our classrooms can look like together when we are starting to collectively develop what is our mission. And it's, you use the word bi-directional, spot on. One of our leaders in the SEL field is saying that, if you're talking about SEL and not equity, you're not talking about SEL. So I don't even think it can be called a layer. I don't think it can be called a thread. I think it needs to be called musical SEL.
I love it. Absolutely. And I love what you just said about the shift from the idea of basically the training the teachers, but now into the co-collaboration of learning. This goes back to the example when you asked me about the prompt. It is that piece right there. If we look at diversity, equity, inclusion, SEL, as a collaborative learning space, because who has all the answers? I do this work every day, all day. I don't have all the answers. So it is always a collaborative learning process that is at play. And I think more of the diversity pieces need to be positioned the exact same way that you're mentioning in your learning process, not only just student and teacher, but colleague to colleague, administrators to teachers, because everyone has a role and responsibility in the work that we do and and actually picking up that mantle and doing the work that we're supposed to do.
We all have a call to action. We all have to take a role in this if we're going to get anywhere. Dr. Robinson, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. This was just such a meaningful dialogue for me. I've learned so much. I can't wait to get this one out so that everyone can hear you talk and just get us to stretch and push us in the right direction. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity to spend time with you. It was fun. We have to do it again, Scott.
100%, my friend. Be well.
You too. Thank you.
Music for All's mission is to create, provide, and expand positively life-changing experiences through Music for All. Our vision is to be a catalyst to ensure that every child across America has access and opportunity to participate in active music making in their scholastic environment. I want to thank Nicole Robinson for her heartfelt contribution to this series and enlightening us onto how to make music and embrace equity with heart for all of our students, especially those underrepresented. I'd like to thank our national presenting sponsor, the Yamaha Corporation of America. Be sure to check out the Yamaha Educator Suite at yamahaeducatorsuite.com. And I would like to thank GIA Publications for their continued support. For Music for All, I'm Scott Edgar. Thank you.